stuff, wear this absorb to help prevent another heart attack or stroke. Heart protection.
I'm gonna text Lauren.
Okay. Oh, she's our.
She's
on the outside.
watching it, so I was like, I need to tell you. I need you to tell me if everything's okay. Everybody should be muted when they come in. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. We're gonna get started in just a few minutes. Just waiting for a few people to come in.
So glad you're here.
Yeah, everybody said they can hear me.
Okay, great.
Just making sure everybody's muted. I think once you start talking, it changes. Well, here it is. I just have a few people right there.
And I'll just maybe tell everyone we'll be getting started in a couple of moments.
Yeah, I told them on here, but
Oh, you did?
we'll
Oh,
get
okay.
started in
Great.
just a few minutes.
Awesome. Then I guess I can. Well, I guess we won't turn on just yet, because then we'll catch what you and I are saying.
They're listening.
Yeah, I think we're about ready to.
Yeah, I think about everybody's in here, so we should be good to go.
Okay, let me just go work my speaker.
Is it working?
Yeah, I think everything's good to go. You have an audience over here.
I see that's my wife.
Okay. I'm just waving to you. They can hear us, so
Oh, I better not say
Billy,
anything.
she can see. Just giving you that warning beforehand.
Thanks. No, I just saved my marriage.
Yeah.
I'll say a couple things and then introduce you. Okay, so I'll turn my mic off, and then when I turn the mic off, you come up. Okay, that way we don't get the interference. All right, testing, testing. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Well, first off, hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming out today. Also, special thank you to all of you attending virtually for tuning in for us for this afternoon's program. So this program is part of programming that we have done for Black History Month. We want to bring some attention to the history of some local Black cemeteries in Baton Rouge, hoping that by bringing attention to them, we will help spread awareness and help increase their care and their prosperous future. So I'm very excited to say that we have multiple speakers tonight. Our main speaker, Mr. Kleinpeter, is an 8th generation Baton Rougean. So he has been researching, repairing, and documenting Baton Rouge cemeteries for over 30 years. He's spent special attention to certain ones like Rose Hill, Little Misery, and the Bird. For tonight's talk, he's going to be talking about Lutheran and Sweet Olive cemeteries. And he has spent a lot of time involved in various historic preservation boards, including Friends of Magnolia Mound, St. Joseph Cemetery, Mid-City Cemeteries Coalition, and Preserve Louisiana. So he's going to lead our talk tonight. And then we're going to also have Executive Director Fairleigh Jackson. She's going to be coming to us from Louisiana Preserve, and she's going to talk a bit about where Sweet Olive stands currently and its future and where we hope it to go in the future. And then we're also going to have the founder of the Friends of Sweet Olive Cemetery, Marquita Ann Cottenham, talk to everybody about how they can get involved in what's going on there and upcoming volunteer opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Kenny Kleinpeter to kick off tonight's program.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. I'm honored to be here, this special place. I don't know if you know this, but I'm also a musician. I wrote a CD, a series of compositions about this building, and the architect, Dankin, considered this very room the heart of the castle. This is the House of Representatives, who were more representative of the people of Louisiana than the uppity senators across the hall. So I welcome you to the heart of the castle, a special place for the whole state of Louisiana. Cemeteries are a special place to me. I'd rather be in an old cemetery than the Sistine Chapel in terms of wanting to get close to God. It is as close as you can get and still stay alive. But it's such a wealth of history and culture and just really what an area is about, especially the town of Baton Rouge. Death is the great equalizer. You're not white, you're not black, you're not rich, you're not poor. You're just a person that lived his life and is going on to his reward. And that is the way I treat every grave that I ever see. So I've been involved and interested and quite frankly fascinated with Black cemeteries as much as the white cemeteries the whole time. I cut my teeth on Highland Cemetery, the oldest surviving cemetery just south of LSU in College Town subdivision, but it didn't take me long to spread out from there. I got involved with other organizations like Friends of Magnolia Mound, and it wasn't long until I saw a map of the plantation layout, and there in the corner was a little graveyard just south of the cabins for the slaves. So I'm gonna start out my presentation with my investigation of that particular burial site. Let's see if I can get my technology straight here. I know this is going to work. There's an on off switch. Put my eyeballs in. Can't remember where it is. There it is. Bingo. Thank you. Maybe it takes a while. Trying to move the slide. Rascal. Don't you love technology? Maybe I'll do it manually.
You are certainly stronger and more.
See if this works. It doesn't. It grows up.
I
can't not get involved.
No, it's fine.
Thank you.
It's funny because we tested.
I guess you're just gonna have to click buttons.
Try that.
Yeah, you have to just click. I think if you hit the arrow.
Just use the arrow. Okay.
Oops, there we go.
Bingo. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Okay, this is the map that I found for Magnolia Mound Plantation. Pointer works. Yeah. So you look right here. Can't read it. I'll blow it up. But here are the slave cabins. Here's the quote unquote big house and the sugar mill. So it was all on a ridge. And so they allowed a little path to the graveyard. Now, they gave them a lot more than some slave owners did, but that is where we're able to locate that graveyard. It says graveyard. So I took that and I overlaid it on the present day aerial photo. And it was pretty easy to do because of the waterway called Corporation Canal, which is essentially in the same place. It's been seen, but it hadn't been moved. So here is the actual graveyard right here. You know, that's often what they did. They gave them an area that was not used in agriculture, not important for the operation of the farm. But in this case, this is roughly the area of it. So this lot, empty lot where I have the white area, is where I actually, it was for sale. And I said, well, I'll just go in there without permission. And I probed the white area of that lot. And the dots, the black dots are where my probe easily goes 100 centimeters, the length of it. It indicated to me that it was very disturbed soil. We never did expect to find clear-cut burial shafts in a slave cemetery because they gave them such a small area. And the saying was that there was always room for one more. And so there's no clear-cut organization for burial sites. They're just practically one on top of the other. So that is a pretty good indication. Part of the graveyard is in the street, and part of it is in the neighbor's yard. Interestingly, I went to the neighbor and let them know what I was doing and asked them if they knew anything about the site. And the lady actually told me, said, well, we were told that it was an old Indian burial ground. And I thought to myself, is that any less or more important than any other? I mean, it's a burial ground. And they, you know, I live on top of a graveyard. I live right next to Highland Cemetery, and I'm honored to do it. I mean, I didn't build the house. And ultimately, if I won the lottery, I'd probably do a poltergeist thing and remove the house and return the property to its intended sacred purpose. But some things have to just wait their turn in life. So I can understand it's not their fault the house was built there, but it does deserve at a minimum a marker to designate that site as a very important place for the burial of people that played a very important role in the development of this country. So that's the story of Magnolia Mound Cemetery. Now I want to move over to Lutheran. Lutheran is a special cemetery. If you don't know, it was actually, I believe, the original burial ground for slaves of the Richmond plantation, which was owned by John or Yehu Perkins, hence Perkins Road, where 100 Oaks area is where his house was. He owned at the most 2,000 acres. It's quite an impressive plantation. In fact, he was the first person to irrigate his land with water from the Mississippi River. He ran pipes from the river to his plantation. Here's an aerial view of 1929 of City Park Lake as it's starting to develop City Park. And you can see what right here is the old Baton Rouge Zoo. It had been in operation for a year or two, wasn't really developed yet. But right behind that, where these cedar trees are, is the beginning of Lutheran Cemetery. So if you were to go to Eddie Robinson Senior Drive, you would find the entrance to Lutheran Cemetery. There are probably about 4,000 to 5,000 burials in there. it's a sea of coffins, quite an impressive sight. And it too looks like it got its start on a ridge, because that's where the Baton Rouge fault line runs across the property. It's quite a drop, a 40-foot drop in elevation to what, essentially the City Park Lakes were originally a swamp that was formed by the fault line. So that's the geology lesson for today. Here's a close-up of those cedar trees that they planted quite early. I mean, they bought the property in 1899. So here we are 30 years later, and those cedar trees are pretty formidable for being planted from seedlings. They may have been able to transplant some, but that does indicate to me that it was a burial ground for a little bit longer than the 20, 30 years that this photo represents. So if you look here, we've got the Perkins plantation at the top. Oops. And right there, J.H. Perkins was actually, he was from Kentucky. He had a twin brother named Henry, and he was John or Jehu, Jehu. And Henry had a plantation at Troy Plantation in St. Francisville, where the nuclear power plant is now. But Jehu had this place, and he brought this water in, had to bring it. This is the area that he did most of his agriculture. This is where the house, the main house was. Now, when he died, his estate listed 150 slaves. So he's one of the largest slave owners of the time. And when his estate was broken up and sold, it listed 20 cabins on it. So I assume that that's the slave cabins. And so he probably for a period of maybe 40, 50 years had to have quite a mortality rate for that many slaves. So that had to be a formidable graveyard for those people. Now, the property didn't go as far as Sweet Olive. It didn't go that far north. So I'm confident that Sweet Olive Cemetery was actually started by the two churches that are listed in some research that was done on a lady's thesis. I forget her name right now, but we'll see it in a little bit. So the only other place that it could be is the fact that he got permission from this John Dono, I think you pronounce it. He was from New Orleans. He's the one who left his estate to city of New Orleans to develop a public school system. And that's why you have all these schools called Mcdonald number 1, 2, 3, etc. He also left the other half of his estate to the city of Baltimore, where he was from, and they got the same school treatment. He was quite a character. He owned property. He's probably worth $5 million in that money back then when he died. And he bought property between Natchez and New Orleans. He was just a land speculator and did really well. So this was one of his properties. He never developed it, or it just sat there. So I think he must have known Dr. Jehu and got permission to run that pipe through his property to the river. And he also probably got permission to bury his slaves near the boundary. And in fact, that is very close to where Lutheran Cemetery is today. Look at this map. This is the extent of his property. I think it's actually where it says Duplantis, Duplanche owns right here. So Sweet Olive would be up in here somewhere. And it seems like a natural for him to bring that pipe across there. So that's my theory at this point. Here's a real close-up of the property with the current interstate and railroad overlaid on it, just for reference. So here is an aerial view of Lutheran Cemetery. It's got some beautiful trees on it. It's got a lovely bottom half that joins with City Park, where the ridge drop off for the fault line is. If we just take that fence down and get the city to incorporate it into Brooks City Park, then it would be, it really is one of the most beautiful spots in Baton Rouge, with the old trees and those old vaults on the ridge. We really need to do that, and I think we can speak about that later. Here's a actual plat of Lutheran, and here's another aerial that overlaid with that plat. And then here's the result of my work. I went in and recorded Lutheran. I took pictures of every burial site, whether it was in ground or a vault, and then took a picture of every marker, and I transcribed the inscriptions onto an Excel spreadsheet, and I developed sections. There's, oops, I do that all the time. There's section A, B, C, and D, and then each row and number, so that can correlate the information to a particular grave site. So you can see the ovals are actually in-ground burials, and the rectangles are vaults that are mostly above ground. Now, they're probably originally in-ground burials under the above-ground vaults. Real estate was still very expensive, and they didn't waste it. They wanted to be with their family, and I think that's why you see so many in-ground burials back here, the ovals as opposed to vaults, and why with the cedar trees up here, people would prefer to be buried down there in the wet bottom part, to me can only be explained as they wanted to be with their ancestors, the original interments of the plantation. And that would explain why the suburb Swartz, which was the first subdivision developed outside of the corporate limits of Baton Rouge, would turn around and just sell that choice property to the Benevolent Society, Lutheran Benevolent Society, rather than develop home sites there, because they knew that there were burials there, and that was probably a very undesirable thing at that time for residents. So I'm gonna put those little pieces together, eventually get archaeologists out there to do an excavation. We'll pull a permit from the Division of Archaeology and try to date some of those earliest in-ground burials to prove that this is in fact how this site originally developed. I love Lutheran. It's a special place. This is the entrance. It's just a sea of vaults. It's the only way I can describe it, with the ridge. And then that's the only ironwork that I could find in there. It really needs to be rehabilitated. It's a beautiful little spot. And especially when the vaults are painted, it's like a rainbow effect in there. You can't buy that kind of view. It's special. It shows you that they're all individuals, that they all were people. They even have a couple that are triple stacked in there, not just double stacked. And if you consider that there's probably somebody, one or two buried underneath those vaults, you could have a whole family in one spot. You know, it's a very, that's one particular view. I mean, I don't know who they got to organize those vaults, but they're definitely in there. It's a beautiful sight. All right, so if you get a chance, please go check out Lutheran. Both cemeteries, Sweet Olive and Lutheran, look great right now before the spring flush. And we have to get in there and start spraying and cutting and doing what we have to do every year keep them presentable. And I will say, when we do the work, Marquita and Tommy and WT and all the other people, Mike Strain, all those people that just work so hard to volunteer in these places, we notice that we start seeing flowers and we start seeing people come in there. So it's important to a community, to its heritage, to keep these things alive, if you will. They're such special places. In Europe, they're parks. You know, they got benches and playgrounds, and they commune. They just absolutely live with their dead. And I think that's a culture that we sorely lack in this country, to continue to, as I like to say, honor thy father and mother. And even though we like cremation now and we scatter our ashes, this is how they wanted to be remembered. And we have a responsibility to their memory to keep these places up. So Sweet Olive, you know, it was probably started in maybe toward the end of the Civil War. I think Tommy had indicated that there was one marker he found that died in 1853. So that's probably one of the earliest burials. But, you know, again, archaeological research would be the only thing to really confirm that. Here's an early map, handwritten map of the two. There were two graveyards. They had this church first. See if I can read it. Read it better from the computer, but let me. The church may have been in this area, but it may have been off the property. And then over here, there's a second church, which was Mount Pleasant, the forerunner of Zion Baptist, I believe. And so they had America Street that ran right through the middle. So it was two different cemeteries. Now it's just one. We call it Sweet Olive. Here's a rotated view. So Society, First African Baptist Church, and then the sons and daughters, Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, were probably the forerunners or the developers of this particular graveyard. Here's an overview, aerial photo. You can see they're packed in pretty good at the corners. Nobody likes to carry those heavy vaults to the middle of the property. So there's still some open area. There's probably quite a few in-ground burials in here too. But why this particular corner was never part of the graveyard is a mystery to me. I have to do some more title research to find out why. Maybe a church was there at one time. But that would be a great piece of property to buy and develop an interpretive center, a visitor center for everybody to come in and really enjoy this spectacular graveyard. W.T. Winfield had spearheaded some work with Roselawn Monument Company to build the wall around it. I would have preferred a fence so you could see in it, but most of the time you didn't want to see in it. It was so overgrown. But lately, you know, volunteers have done a great job of keeping it clean and presentable so that people go in there. And one of my heroes of all time is, well, we talk about this. This is probably the only known, well, one of the few white burials in Sweet Olive. This was Ida Pollock. She was from New York. She was an heiress. She had plenty of money. And after the Civil War, she came down to Baton Rouge and started a school called Blundenholme. You may have heard of it. Some important people in Baton Rouge actually got their start in that school. It was an orphanage for Black children after the Civil War. And they took the old sugar house at Magnolia Mound Plantation is where the school got it started. It was a boarding school, and it developed more and more over the years. So that people like Dr. Clark in Old South Baton Rouge actually got his education there. So she was buried there, and they actually, the community put this marker there for her as a tribute to, it says, this tablet was erected by the colored people of Baton Rouge as a tribute to the work of her work for 29 years in service that she has given to them. So she really did a lot to help the Old South Baton Rouge community, you know, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and develop their own occupations. Now, another hero of mine is Fred Matthews, who took care of Sweet Olive and Lutheran. He's actually buried at Lutheran for many years until his 90s. What a dedicated man. I just can't help but pay homage to him every time I go into Lutheran. He's buried with his parents and the rest of his family over there. So that's just the two main Black cemeteries in Baton Rouge. There are several others, especially early slave cemeteries, that I know locations from maps like Magnolia Mound's plantation map. And they have to be handled very sensitively because usually the property owner doesn't want to have to deal with it. It's going to take a lot of money to do the research, to map them out and prove that this is a burying ground. And then the least we can do is properly mark the site and then deal with the legalities of giving descendants reasonable visitation rights to that private property. So these are some of the challenges involved in repurposing these sites for what they're intended. People just wanted to be remembered, and that's our obligation, both spiritually and as a community. Whether it's difficult to deal with slavery or not, nobody in this room is responsible for that. And Condoleezza Rice, I love her to death. She says, you know, we'll never get over it until we talk about it. And so that's one thing I'm very appreciative of the Old State Capitol to recognize Black History Month, because we're all just people. And we need to remember our past, if not to, if only just not to redo it. We just need to know where we came from so we can figure out where we're going. I'll entertain any questions if we have any time. Thank you. Yeah, it's actually right under the health building. What is it, the little health clinic? And yeah, it was really hush hush at the time. I think Huey Long is not the only burial ground he discovered on the LSU property. Where the plantation house for Derry was occupied by Isham Fox, who purchased Gartner's plantation. It was called several years later, and he started his own little family graveyard as opposed to being buried in Highland, which was still on the property. And then when Huey went to build the new president's house on that location, he had them pull those markers up and throw them in the creek right behind where, kind of right behind where LSU Lab School is. So, and now, you know, a few years ago, they actually culverted that canal, and I guess it's part of Bayou de Plancher. But yeah, the tendency back then was don't let anybody know and get rid of any evidence. I've seen that in other places where they physically dug a pond in a subdivision and brought the dirt to raise the dirt level a foot so that all the bricks would be a problem to landowners. It's hard to sell cemetery property if the cemetery is obvious. So yeah, that's where I think Garrick's slaves were buried, because Garrick was buried in Highland Cemetery, and then his offspring were buried in Magnolia as soon as it was open. So yeah. Yeah, it's primarily from widows and orphans. Yeah, much like brother took care of his orphans. But yeah, that, you know, is still part of the suburban Swartz that was developed in the area. And I bet that Swartz would purchase that property from Gary to develop houses. If it hadn't been for something being wrong with that acres. Yeah.
Started and then in 1870, the rainbow, and some people
Yeah, part of his history. Any other questions? No, it really depends. First of all, on the attitude of their owner. And then secondly, the lay of the land. Where was it going to be convenient and out of the way of agriculture purposes? Sometimes it was quite a distance from the cabins. It's quite a tradition. They even would not even allow burials except at night when they weren't working. They wouldn't even let them take off the work to bury the dead. And they had these torch processions that would travel quite a ways from the cabins to the burial site in some cases. It's quite a tradition that, of the time. So there is no rhyme or reason. You know, you have to really look at a plat and a layout and kind of get a sense of what was going on there to figure out where the cabins would have been, where maybe a ridge or some place that was not conducive to agriculture or other, you know, purposes to piece it together. You just have to keep an open mind. You know, sometimes when I'm looking for the owner's graveyards from the house, I'll get on the back porch of the big house, and I'll say, it's going to be not too close, but not too far, but within sight, maybe about 100 yards from the house. But, you know, half the time I'm pretty wrong on that. So there is no rhyme or reason.
Epitaphs. Did you find a lot of scriptures written on their tombstones that you found in these two? Which was more common than you find?
Well, the primary material scenic markers, and they have stamped in their address, but, you know, gone but not forgotten is, and I believe I found one page where forgotten is spelled correctly. I've almost forgotten how to spell it correctly myself. It's with an E, not an O. And, the Holy Bible, book laid out, just some beautiful seashells impressed into, these things really point, they really show you how somebody loved that person, to go to that effort. You go to Mcdonald and see huge granite megaliths, and they don't show you the love that you see when somebody uses a stick to catch you the data and see markers. That's true love. That's something we often run from. It's not how much you have, how much money you have, it's how much love you have in your heart. I think that's what I love from the Black community, family, streets, and ties. We can all love each other a little more. Yeah, quite point. They're no two alike. And there are thousands of markers. They're all individual. Rubber stamp like they are right now in New Orleans, cemeteries, cities of the dead, lost in, lost in it's everyone. I don't know about Sweet Island, but I know Lutheran was occasionally, I think, probably like December. Sweet Island, maybe the same.
First, I registered with the state board of cemeteries. I think the latest burial we found was 1987.
Why they're allowed to look here extra, they're not supposed to be under anymore. That's where we have marked things, you know, this is out. Small cemetery on Old Heaven Highway. We know the dating on that, that is like large, or is that?
Yeah, that's a story. Maybe a few minutes. That's fact because David Davis was an escaped slave from, I believe, the state of Missouri during the Civil War. He joined the Union Army. He came out as a corporal, so Roosevelt Private, became some rank. He was paid for his services. Back when he bought 50 acres in back of William Sweet, Living Busy Cemetery. It's taken to the Clark County Cemetery. It gives the Clark County Mall name is taken from the original plantation. It's huge, grand, Florida, all of them did was law timber. Very close to it, maybe but anyway, the Davis family buried there, subdivided the lots to his family, descendants and all. And, so he's buried in there somewhere. So I think that's to escape from slavery, fighting the war, and having one just come down here. Why he didn't know here, I don't know. But he did, and he did quite well.
He was a member of the occupied occupation forces of that group. He came down in 1860. And 30 years later, he was born. But his background is Missouri. And it's a very interesting story, I just say. You know, go back, I did a lot of research. original information I got was from 1856. Gerald Holt had lost Little District Plantation in Texas. Gerald Holt actually ended up being the mayor of Baton Rouge in 1862. However, James Mcdonald, he purchased it in 1856 and he lost it in 1866 because he escaped the forces because of the Baton Rouge occupation. But Little District is very large and the location is at the very end of the plantation. What I believe would be a place that they would the slave cemetery and the tradition, the oral tradition of Little District continues. He purchased it from Mary, but Mary wanted to get rid of it, so one cemetery. He just didn't. So I'd like to talk to you more about it.
Right, we do, parking lot, we take care of that. Try to keep it up, even though it's still private.
Years of paid things, still owns. Yeah.
Good, good call. All right. I'll make it quick, so. No, I've done the A training, that particular location. Started from the red, what games, Hi.
Thank you so much, Kenny. That was a very, very informative and an educational talk. We appreciate that. So at this point, I do want to invite the Executive Director of Preserve Louisiana up, Ms. Fairleigh Jackson, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Sweet Olive's past ownership, current ownership, and hopeful care for and perpetuity for the future. So I'll welcome Fairleigh Jackson.
Thank you. I don't know if can I forward this to Marquita's first slide, or is that possible? And I'm actually not going to. I think I was allotted 10 minutes, but I'm going to be quicker than that.
Okay, sure.
Kenny, where'd he go? There you are. Thank you so much. Very informative. We are grateful for not just this, but all of your investment in preservation. You know, it feels a little bizarre to be the second non-Black person presenting at a Black History Month presentation. So I am actually going to acknowledge that and kind of move forward with that and let you know that I am available for more information around the ownership and what we've discovered through extensive research with the Attorney General's office and also the Department of Justice around the ownership of Sweet Olive. You can't talk about Sweet Olive without talking about the complex ownership of that, and that complexity is rooted in racism, in Black history, and what people experience. It is the inability for organizations to incorporate, where they could actually transfer titles and deeds. It was the inability for people to transfer property. It was a very difficult time. It was moving from sons of daughters 1 to 2 to like just very complex things, whether you're talking about the 2 owners of Mount Zion or what we now are thinking Mount Pleasant. But this complex history isn't about a disorganized, uncaring community. It is about an oppressed community. And this is the history of these cemeteries. And I think this is something we have to think about. And we can't think about these cemeteries without thinking about the path forward. So when we look at Sweet Olive, for example, we look at a cemetery that is 2 blocks from Magnolia, that has been in the 1947 plan of government, takes on Magnolia and commits to a perpetual care for the white cemetery. Yet, 2 blocks away, we have Sweet Olive that is just sitting there out there and has not been taken in for perpetual care. As of today, Breck maintains Magnolia. We are looking at Mount Zion and Mount Pleasant. We have people activated, working on this, trying to make this something that people like Marquita, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, don't have to spend hours and hours trying to do community, work and gatherings and, motivating people. Why aren't we taking care of our Black history like we're taking care of our predominantly white history? This is the question around Black cemeteries. And I'm the white face saying it, but I think it's important. I wish that the family of Jeremy Thomas and Joanne Thomas and Ed Thomas were here, that have dedicated their lives as caretakers, as Black families with 5 generations at Lutheran Cemetery. I wish they were here tonight to talk about this. This is something that's so important that we as presenters and creators need to do better. So as we celebrate Black History Month, I've talked more than I even wanted to. I am accessible fairly at preserve-louisiana.org, but it is more important for me to yield my time to a Black voice during Black History Month for someone who has dedicated so much time, so much energy, discovered her ancestors in Sweet Olive, and a former candidate for Metro Council, and do I say? Why not? Running for US Senate. So this is a woman who has dedicated herself, is an incredible person, an advocate, and I don't need any more time. I wish I could give her more. Thank you.
Thank you, Fairly. Hello, everyone. My name is Marquita Cunningham, and I am the founder of Friends of Sweet Olive Cemetery nonprofit group. Forgot I'm calling you guys. Can you hear me? Yes. Awesome. So I'm just going to be speaking about the nonprofit and things you guys can do to get involved. Like I said, I am the founder of the Friends of Sweet Olive Cemetery nonprofit. I have one of the persons involved right there. Say, hey, Mike. That's him. He does a lot of work. So we are a nonprofit organization formed to address the need to keep this cemetery maintained and to restore it as well. We seek to completely revitalize this cemetery and hope to be a catalyst for other abandoned cemeteries like Sweet Olive. We organize preservation days throughout the year to help maintain the grass and grave sites. We are actively fundraising right now to help aid in the cemetery renewal process, which is just rebuilding of the broken grave sites. This picture you see here is of Samuel Pierre Jr. He's actually a 23-year-old soldier buried here at Sweet Olive. So here are some ways you can get involved. You can volunteer at our preservation days. You can adopt a grave like Samuel Pierre Jr.'s, or you can donate. We usually have a preservation day 1 to 2 times a month whenever weather permits. So please follow our Facebook group, Preserve Sweet Olive Cemetery, for future cleanup dates. Or if you know any groups who would like to volunteer, send your kids over. And we also have Adopt a Grave. You can learn more at FOSOCBR.org. There's a number of different graves actually listed there, and they range from $100 all the way to $12,000. And this will help repair the ones that are broken and exposed to the weather. You can donate via Venmo, Cash App, or mail, and you can also donate supplies. We love to get extra weed eaters, string, just gardening supplies to help keep the grass down. If you want to keep in touch with us, we have a Facebook group, which is Preserve Sweet Olive Cemetery, a Facebook page, Friends of Sweet Olive Cemetery Nonprofit, Instagram, FOSOCBR, and email FOSOCBR@gmail.com. As Fairly mentioned, when I started this work, I didn't actually know that I had an ancestor buried in Sweet Olive. I just saw that it was decaying, it wasn't being kept up, and I thought it was very sad. One thing that my grandmother always taught me was to respect the dead and honor the dead. We would go to cemeteries all the time, and people think it's weird, but that's why I don't find it weird. That's why I was walking through a cemetery and discovered this, because I thought cemeteries were cool. And I was actually with my daughter at the time when I discovered Sweet Olive Cemetery. And I was telling her how cool cemeteries are and how they preserve history and how we could learn from it. And this was especially cool from us being from San Francisco, California. We didn't have anything, a Black only cemetery. So I thought that was very cool and a very good opportunity to learn. Well, when we walked through it, there was an open casket with a body right there. That was my 7-year-old daughter at the time who discovered it. And so I had to explain to her how that wasn't normal, that wasn't right, and why we should change it. But you can't just tell a kid that it's something's wrong and not try to change it yourself, because they're gonna start questioning you. So I took up the work right away, just because after asking a couple questions and trying to figure out who's supposed to maintain this place, I wasn't getting anywhere. So this is why we do the work. You know, we really respect and love the dead and the ancestors, and we feel like they should be respected as well. And this is no way for someone to live. But I think this is actually a great opportunity, because we have Joan Gardner here, who is actually of the Mcdonaldville Cemetery. She knows a lot of information that Kenny was also talking about. So I kind of want to yield the rest of my time to Ms. Chuckle.
Thank you, Marky. Yes, my name is Joan Garner, and just to let you know a little bit about myself, my father was actually in the sit-in movement here in Baton Rouge and sat at Sit-in's drugstore, and that is part of the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail. Thank you. My work on cemeteries started simply because I live next to a cemetery. And it is Mcdonald Cemetery, which is in the city of New Orleans and the city of Gretna. John Mcdonough, the same individual that was mentioned in Kenny's presentation, is the same John Mcdonough. He was a very large landowner. This is the cemetery that he was actually buried in 1850 when he passed, and he's since been reinterred in the city of Baltimore. So living next to the cemetery, my family had a number of issues relating to land issues and how it impacted our residential property. So we've been asking questions well before I was born, basically asking who owned the cemetery. So the city of Gretna does maintain the cemetery. And interestingly enough, I'm still asking the question, who owns the cemetery? So as Fairly mentioned, these cemeteries, apparently it's not uncommon for them to have very complex histories as far as ownership is concerned. And that is true with Mcdonaldville. And so the city of Gretna has maintained it since 1913. When I asked the city of Gretna, I did some research on it to do a title search. They did comply with my request, and it confirmed some of the information that I was suspecting from what the historical record was indicating. So as Kenny mentioned about John Mcdonough, he was a landowner and donated his property to both the cities of New Orleans and the city of Baltimore. The interesting thing about Mcdonald Cemetery is that it appears at this moment that it's owned by the city of Baltimore, that apparently forgot about it in 1859. So I've reached out to the city of Baltimore, the city of Gretna, and the city of New Orleans, and this is being worked out at this moment. So there are some issues relative to that. So one of the issues is that in 2016, the Jefferson Parish Historical Society placed a marker at Mcdonaldville. And even though it's well documented that it was the slave burial ground on John McDonough's plantation, there was no mention on that marker of it being a slave burial ground. It mentions prominent families rest there. And so the interesting history is that John Mcdonough died in 1850, which is before the Civil War. He was buried at McDonoughville. And then there was a free man of color that maintained it. Apparently he was the person who was maintaining it before, when it was still a plantation. And so he continued to maintain it. And it wasn't until 40 years later that, this is around 1890, that a white citizens committee had issues with the fact that he was maintaining it, because he was allowing blacks and whites to be buried side by side. John McDonough was the first white man to be buried there. So at that point, the cemetery was in fact integrated. And he was also charging for burials, which isn't uncommon because he was basically serving as the Saxton, and the Saxton would have been paid for their labor digging the grave. So the Citizens Committee had an issue with it. They went to Mayor Shakespeare of the city of New Orleans. Mayor Shakespeare is also the mayor that was mayor at the time of the Italian massacre, the largest lynching in the city of New Orleans. And they had an issue with it. They ran this individual, the free man of color, off. And Jefferson Parish, because one thing I forgot to mention is the parish line actually runs through the cemetery. So it's both separating the parish as well as the cities. But at that time, the city of Gretna didn't exist. So it was just simply the parish of Jefferson. So Jefferson Parish asked for use of the cemetery from the city of New Orleans, and the city of New Orleans said, yes, as long as you help us to maintain John McDonough's grave. There was a big fuss about McDonough's grave simply because one of the things that he requested was that flowers be placed at his grave in exchange for his act of donating money to the schools. And so that was done. And then at some point in time, this, years passed, the city of Gretna became incorporated. When the city of Gretna became incorporated, they took the position, well, the parish line, or what's now our city line, runs through the cemetery, so we think it belongs to us. And so they went to Jefferson Parish and said, we think it's ours. Please turn it. Well, I don't know if exactly if they were very polite about it, but they said, they wanted the cemetery. And Jefferson Parish said, no, we don't think you have any right to it. And then they said, well, we'll bring the chief of police. And this is all in newspaper articles that I located. And the city of Gretna took it from that point. Apparently they brought force of law through police and they took it. And they've maintained it since 1913. And right now there's also the Mcdonald Historic District that will be submitted as a nomination. And some of this history is recorded there. I've presented some of this information to the State Historic Preservation Officer. But as I said before, these issues are being worked out. So I have contacted, when I reached out to the city of Gretna, they did do the title search. And so they went to Jefferson Parish because they thought it went back to Jefferson Parish, and Jefferson's done a quick claim deed. And so I've also reached out to the city of New Orleans and the city of Baltimore. And I've also asked for apologies from both the city of New Orleans and the city of Gretna for the treatment of these burials, the segregation of the burials. And there's a number of other issues that are attached to that, like I said, because these issues actually come into the present day. And I can speak to that personally because as a property owner near Mcdonald Cemetery, there's been some things that have happened where zoning violations, things of that sort. And so that's part of the reason why we started asking the question about who owns the cemetery and what's the jurisdiction, how are these issues going to be enforced, which I'm still trying to figure that out at this point. So I have been successful with recently submitting Mcdonald Cemetery to a network that I just learned about. It's called the Black Cemetery Network. They're based through the University of South Florida. I'm also working with Dr. Ryan Gray with the University of New Orleans, who is currently teaching a cultural resource management class at this moment, in which I am virtually participating in, and some students will very soon select some of the projects that he has listed. Mcdonald Cemetery is one of those projects that is listed. So this is currently a work that's taking place. I had no plans of speaking today. I was here to listen. And so apparently they, as Kitty said, this is a spiritual work. I do believe that because it's taken me in places that I really had no intention of going, or things that I had no intention of doing, including recently applying for a doctoral program at the University of New Orleans in urban planning with an emphasis in historic and cultural preservation at really came out of this body of work with the cemetery, and I had absolutely no plans of applying for a doctoral program. So it's just been an interesting journey, and I'm eager to see how this will unfold in the future, because I don't have the answers as to how this would look, how this will work out. I do believe that it will work out. I do know that there are people working on it, including myself, and I'm very appreciative to Marquita to allowing me to speak, and Fairly over there, who's been very supportive of me, and so many other people that have been supportive, including Kathy Hambrick with River Road African American Museum, where I've worked, and also West Baton Rouge Museum, where I work part-time as well. Thank you.
Oh, looks like we have a question. Yes, sir. Yeah, he has a question for you. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone so much again for coming out for tonight's program. Hang on just one second. I just want to say a couple of things. So thank you all so much for coming out. We are going to let y'all, of course, talk a bit and say a couple more things. But I also want to call attention to an event that we're going to be having next week. It'll be for the first Sunday of March. We're going to have the artist Jambo Buff come, and she'll talk about a current exhibition that we have open for you all to view now, if you'd like to see it while you're here, is Changing Landscapes, the Solomon Northrop Tale. And throughout this exhibition, you'll be able to see various landscapes that Solomon Northrop was able to see while he was in Louisiana. And so I hear that we have a couple other things that people would like to say. Well, thank you all again so much for coming out tonight, and thank you all of the speakers for y'all collaboration on tonight's program and helping spread the word of these very important cultural and historic sites in Baton Rouge.
Do you want her to hand out the evaluations?
Oh, yes. Oh, and before everybody leaves, if y'all wouldn't mind, we have some program evaluations out on the seats throughout our chamber here with some pencils, and we would love to get your feedback on tonight's program, what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could improve upon. If y'all would please take a moment to fill those out, it'll help us with our future education programming. Thank you so much, and y'all have a very safe and wonderful night.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
I can't reach my hand. Hello. I can't get it up. Next to my